Hey ho! Hey ho! Hey ho! Hey ho! I think we've gone through a period where too many children and people have been given to understand I have a problem. It is the government's job to cope with it. Or, I have a problem. I will go and get a grant to cope with it. I am homeless. The government should house me. And so they are casting their problems on society. And who is society? There is no such thing. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people, and people look at themselves first. Thank you, Margaret Thatcher. A tree standing does nothing for GDP until it's cut down. Diane Coyle, British economist. And then there is the constitutive other. Constitutive other. We are noble because they are ignoble. We are worthy because they are unworthy. We are virtuous because they are sinful. It is theirs because it's not ours. It is ours because it's not theirs. Theirs, ours, theirs, ours, theirs, ours, theirs, ours, theirs, ours, theirs, ours, tipping point. The anti-antiseptic tipping point. And your anti-entertainment machine, Mike Boyle at the controls. And our show is titled today, What If It Belongs to Nobody? We think that if an item or items belong to either a person or a group, only then it has value. And for those of you who have been following the show, I'm sure you can recall some of the examples going back to John Locke and the idea of common property. But that is not what we're going to cover in the show. We're going to get down into the dirt. So if you can use it but not own it, then it makes no difference in what condition you leave it in. And this is all tied to the value of the transactional. Only when you can extract value as remuneration does it really have value. In Auto 2023, we have taken that form and we've taken it to the extremes. Where it's no longer just physical objects or that transactional nature. Because we get paid for doing the work, they have the right to ask for whatever task that might be included in whatever remit. But we have taken that feeling, that thought, that judgment call, we've taken it to the next level, where our relationships are based on that transactional component. You might know this feeling, especially when I hear from people I haven't heard from in a while, or individuals I hear from periodically, that you have the feeling you've read the book, you know the story, you know how it ends. Hi, how you doing? Haven't heard from you a while. Hope you're doing okay. And then comes the sting. I need help with, can you? You're so great at this. You could do it much better than me. But I need it within the next 24 hours. Can you do that? I could even pay you. So the converse is, if you don't hear from them, then they don't need something from you. And the best is that you have been put into a category. Yes, you have. And within that category, as unimportant as whatever that duty may be, or that quality that apparently you have, but you've been put into a box. And they think you can't do anything else. So is it worthwhile to explain to these people that you can do much more than what they're asking for? That would mean that they would have to have a real interest in you. And they would have to take the time to get to know you. And because time is the most precious commodity, and if you're not making money with the time that you have, then it has no value. I can give you an example, something that took place about 5 years ago. I was holding a workshop, and I was using different techniques. And one of the individuals who attended made a claim, but really what was missing was design thinking. That would have made it so much better. And really what we need to do is get some professional people who can perform design thinking, because that would have improved the quality of what we just experienced. And you don't know if you should get upset or if you can just remind yourself that very often we find we are confronted with the theater of the absurd, that there is no sense to be made in this thought process. But I didn't see the value to even mention to him that the vast majority of the activities that we had been performing were indeed design thinking. That showed to me that he had no clue what design thinking was. He probably read about it in a book or heard somebody talking about it, and it was presented as a silver bullet. And he wanted to show that he was very knowledgeable, and so that's why he made that comment. She said, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm leaving you tonight. I found someone new. He's waiting in the car outside." "Oh, honey, how can you do it? We swore each other's everlasting love." She said, "Well, yeah, I know. But when we did, there was one thing we weren't really thinking of, and that's money." So we talk about those things that belong to us, including the rights over things and people. But what about those things that we think don't belong to any of us? Or they shouldn't, they don't. And I think when I use the word here, belonging, it's not to be inferred as being something possessive. But more tied to the idea of something that we all have rights towards. And on the same token, we all hold a certain responsibility towards ensuring that those things that belong to us, that they stay intact, that everyone continues to hold the right to use those resources, that those resources are not infinite, they're finite, and only by taking care of those resources can we ensure that not only everybody still has the right to use them, but those that are not yet here, aka generations in the future, that they would have the same rights for usage. And we know all of this doesn't take place on its own. It's something that we have to work on. And that's a struggle. And it requires us to spend a lot of time to foster that type of environment. We don't get paid for it, so of course we don't see the value. And unfortunately, that's where it usually stops. So our solution through time has been, to a lessening degree, unfortunately, over the last 40 years, that we claim that the state is the institution who manages those things that really don't belong to anyone, or they belong to all of us. And you can put both conditions into the same bucket, if you ask me, because they both lead to the same. So we entrust this nebulous institution called the state to manage those things. Apart from the fact that we should always raise the question, so who does the state belong to? Doesn't the state belong to all of us? If it doesn't, then we should clearly ask the question, why? And of course, you and me and the neighbors all know that unfortunately, the state does not belong to all of us. But then, if it doesn't belong to all of us, who does it belong to? Or let's focus on those things that belong to all of us and belong to nobody in particular, and how we treat them. And very possibly, if we were to argue that the the state doesn't belong to all of us. It only belongs to the people with power. Then those items, those resources, because they're within the state's domain, those resources are to be despised. Let me give you an example. And this example might be biased, and I would never make the claim that this example is an absolute. It's based upon certain observations that perhaps have been skewed through time, but nevertheless, if we have an abandoned building where we infer that building does not belong to anybody, you can't look quick enough to find that building covered with graffiti. And that one's an easy one to call because that building is abandoned. That means it doesn't belong to anyone. And we can do whatever we want. But I've noticed recently that those things that are clearly owned by some public entity or owned by the state, that they are also fair game. Because if it's owned by the state, then that means it's really owned by nobody. And you could take two different approaches on this. Either you think, well, it doesn't matter. It belongs to nobody. Or you might even think, rage against the machine. That perhaps this is a way for us to show our protest to the setup that we're forced to deal with. So that means you say, I will show you. Yes. So, under the constitutive other, if these buildings have graffiti, which buildings don't have graffiti? Well, very often I found that, and this is not an absolute, but for the most part, private buildings have no graffiti. I have no idea why. But they seem to be spared. Money is power, freedom, a cushion, the root of all evil, the sum of blessings. Carl Sandburg. So continuing with that thought tied to the graffiti, if we were to look at those things that belong to nobody, or often seen not to belong to anyone, they fall within this realm called the public space. Now, the public space can be in an urban environment, a park, or a square, or they can be outside the urban environment, the woods. But those areas, under these definitions, they don't really belong to anybody. Let's concentrate on the urban environment. And this is a conversation I've had a number of times over the last few years. And I suspect that I'm not alone. But the complaint that I receive continuously is how migrants treat public space. So we're back to the constitutive others. Because the migrants treat public space that way, then that means the locals don't do that. So I thought it would be interesting, it would be an interesting exercise to find out whether anyone's actually asked migrants what they felt about public space. The first point that I would think of immediately is, how do you define public space? What is your perception of public space? Who does that belong to? What roles and responsibilities do we have as individuals vis-a-vis the public space? Are you happy with the way the public space is managed? If not, then what would you like to change? But of course, the difference in this process would be that I would be asking people what they thought instead of actually assuming, because I treat public space well, that they're the ones that don't. And really, that's what we're talking about. It has nothing to do with whether certain groups are or are not treating public space right. It has everything to do with our perception and the way that we approach it. And that was what I was trying to get to. So I raised the point to one of the magistrates, asking, well, just out of curiosity, has anybody actually asked migrants? And received a response, we don't know. But ask this magistrate, they should know this. They should be able to answer your question. So it was a bit of a laborious process because I had to ask the question about 3 or 4 times, I think, before I was able to get a definitive answer. I think part of it is because nobody really wanted to admit that they'd never completed that exercise, which would mean that they were admitting that they found no value in actually performing the exercise. Best to just move on and ignore the faux pas. So after performing 3 or 4 queries, I finally received a response and said, no, it hasn't been done. So the interesting part of this quandary was that we have multiple magistrates that are responsible for multiple elements within our society. But because of standardization, because we do not believe that these parts have anything to do with each other, and they are to be viewed and actioned in isolation, it leads us, because we're still in the current state, it leads us to a situation where those duties don't belong to anybody, and so therefore they are not addressed. And be careful that if you were to address them, then that would mean that you are acknowledging that there are cracks. There are cracks that people, things, situations, conditions, well, they fall through them here in our society. And we don't want to admit that, do we, right? And very possibly that if somebody higher in the chain, in fact, it's not a possibility, it's a definite, if somebody higher in the chain would say, we need to do that, and because there is no clarity of who is responsible, and the various departments would be interested in brown-nosing, they would all be raising their hands to complete this exercise and make whoever the politician is look good. But because nobody's taken the effort, it just doesn't happen. Which takes me to the next logical step. That if we say that these things do not belong to anybody, and then the state is the custodian, well, that would mean that the state is responsible for the production. And it is our role as citizens to be the consumers. And we can find all kinds of examples here, especially tied to the ultimate marketing tool used today, and that would be climate change. And please don't take this one the wrong way. It has nothing to do with whether climate change exists or it doesn't. We're not going to waste our time talking about that one. But the real problem is that we're talking about the symptoms and we are not talking about the cause. But we feel very happy just staying with the symptoms. Thank you very much. So let's stay with the symptoms. So we're going to plant more trees. And with that, we do our job. And it's great about these trees because they're all in a controlled environment. And that means that we can control the trees. We can standardize the trees. We can ensure that the trees are productive. We can show what we have produced. And we, as the consumer citizen, know exactly what our role is, and we dutifully follow that cue. And this is all based upon the premise that we assume that the state is to provide the public space, that we are not empowered to manage our own public space, and that we are there to consume that of what the state produces. And what happens if indeed we decide to take over the public space? Well, you can ask anyone from the last generation what happens there. And you can ask anyone who does not follow the unwritten rules tied to the public space very often being private, but we pretend that it's public space. The best example I could think of is a shopping mall. Is that truly a public space? There it's quite obvious that the businesses are there to produce, and we are there primarily or exclusively there to consume. Either consume the pseudo-entertainment being provided, but that's about it. You are within the realm of Radio Tipping Point, and our show today is titled, What If It Belongs to Nobody? How do we deal with that? Money changes everything. I said money. Money changes everything. We will think we know what we're doing that don't mean a thing. That's all in the past now. money changes everything. And is so often the case when you feel that you have entered the valley of darkness. Somebody out of the blue shows up with a flashlight. You have no idea where this person came from. You start to wonder if maybe within some greater cosmos this was part of the plan. But let's not think about that one too much. But I was very, very fortunate recently to have had that engagement of that individual who came with the flashlight, where I felt that I was very often in that belly of darkness. And this person decided that permission was not required to take action. That transaction is not the sole motivator. That there are higher standards that we often forget. But they supersede all of this. And that motivator has everything about doing the right thing, defining what your own standards are. What is your purpose? That you do not need permission to do it. And that most people are not going to understand why you do it if indeed you are not receiving any type of funding. They will not understand that you will take your time, and often it requires a lot of time, to do those things that help enhance those things that really do belong to all of us. So this individual that I met, he does follow a long line of what I thought was a dying order, one that I know from years gone past. And I'll take this back, maybe 50 years, maybe a little bit longer. No, let's say 50 years. After understanding the power that we have as individuals within the realm of the collective, the threat that was found from this collection of individuals who had pretty much decided not to accept the status quo and realized that through civil disobedience, and perhaps sometimes not so civil on the disobedience part, that they had much more power than they realized. And it scared the powers that be to no end. And so there was it became slash and burn around the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. sometimes earlier, sometimes in certain areas later. But it didn't completely die. We found that within the realm of what was originally the internet, back in the late 80s, early 90s, that space was open to all. And the individuals who were involved in that area, they all fervently believed that it belongs to all. And they felt that the power that could be derived by having a platform, having a shared space that belonged to all, would enable us to create that society that we want to live in. So this individual was truly the person with the flashlight within my valley of darkness. And probably because this person was fortunate in things, as often, I remind myself very often that things could have turned out much different. And we should always be thankful and grateful, because within that realm of situational versus dispositional, we have all met too many people who have ended up on the wrong side of the situational, and then all of a sudden the constitutive other raises its ugly head, and then we say, it happened to you because it doesn't happen to us. As if there was any moral order that was managing all this in the cosmos. So this individual doesn't believe in that. This person believes that, and it's a he, I've already given that away. He believes within that moral framework, without compromise, that you can create that world. We have the ability to create that world. We have the duty to create that world. And there's nothing stopping us from going ahead and making it happen. So we did. And the key was to magnify how many of us are actually out there and working on things because we are trying to foster an environment that's inclusive, that it belongs to everyone, and everyone is welcome. And there are no financial deterrents. And everyone has something to share. And we want that place where sharing is just appreciated. So he built a platform because he saw that nobody had done it. And then interesting things started to happen. Open information is a beautiful thing. Open information that is not tied to any ulterior motive is a beautiful thing. So all of a sudden, people in different communities started to realize that their neighbors were doing something very similar. And that was a revelation for them. So the creation of this platform was a major leverage point. Leverage point being something small that really doesn't take much effort, but brings a big impact. And that was his motivation. But now it starts getting interesting. And I had, for any of you that were involved in the internet back then you know the story. And if we look at the current state, then we know where that's led us to. So this guy now, he gets all kinds of queries because people understand that he's built something that has a lot of interest. And of course, they're coming into it from this transitional mindset, or transactional mindset, better said. Transactional mindset where it thinks, well, if you can't make money from this, what's the value? So they are looking to exploit what he has put together with the intention that they can make some money on it. And of course, they hold out the monetary carrot to him. And I've been holding a dialogue with him over the last week or so, and it's turned out to be a real ethical query for both of us. A really worthwhile conversation where he is always concerned that he's doing the right thing. And you know the situation where you think you're doing the right thing, but sometimes you're not sure. And often you do not have somebody that you can turn to as a sounding board. Just going back to the comments I made in the beginning of the show, where I mentioned that I found myself in a situation where most people that contact me are looking for something. So based upon this transactional way of looking at things. And he's confronted with this. And we've been holding conversations to say, so what are the boundaries? Because very often in life it's not that clear. What are the boundaries? And it's not always that easy to say, I'm going to stay with what I have, not knowing where it's going to take me. Not knowing whether I have the willpower to hold out. Not knowing whether I can hold the bad influence at bay. But I know one thing. The alternative is not tenable. And even if I fall, it's not because I didn't try. And the real key about this effort that I'm referring to here, he built it, but he does not look at this as being his. He understands it belongs to all of us. In fact, this is a major tenet that he understands. It can only work if it belongs to all of us. Meaning that there are no impediments for participation. There is no reward to be found whether you participate or not participate, certainly on a transactional level. That reward is coming from internal motivators, aka autonomy and mastery. That he's interested in creating an atmosphere where people are focusing on the essence being who they are, what they can offer, and relishing in this opportunity to just be yourself. Right, just be yourself. This is not without any rules. That means we need clear structures. We need clarity. And there he is very adamant. And I understand completely why. Because he's afraid if the rules are not clear, if the structures are not clear to what he's putting together, then there's a real chance that the whole effort will go south. And he doesn't want that to happen. But the real beauty of his efforts, when you think about it, just like true love, it's not possessive. They shake your hand and they smile and they buy you a drink. They say, "We'll be your friends. We'll stick with you till the end." But everybody's only looking out for themselves, and you say, well, who can you trust? I'll tell you, it's just nobody else's money. You know, the defense of those things that belong to all of us, and I'm not just referring to human beings, I'm referring to all of those things to be found within our ecosystem called the planet or the universe. Let's expand our horizons. We're talking about the universe, folks. This all doesn't happen on its own. Just like the example that I've given you from this gentleman with the flashlight who assists us all in that valley of darkness. It all requires a certain diligence. Because we're on a path where we're not always sure if this is the right path, then we need the ability to change course. Which means that it requires us to be very, very adaptive. Within such an environment, there is a huge opportunity for conflict. And in comparison to the standard fare, We need to be able to embrace conflict and understand that the conflict per se has nothing to do with our feelings towards the individuals. We understand that conflict is normal. We understand that we need to make conflict transparent. We understand that this is not always easy. And we also understand to do it right, we just don't have a choice. So it requires all kinds of recalibration. And although we don't get paid for it, it requires us to take a lot of time to reflect. And there are ways that we can do this. If we're able to go ahead and establish common values and governance that are all based upon the individuals involved, not something that's instilled from up above high, or something that we feel is the standard that we should be following, but rather we make sure that agreement is inclusive, meaning everyone who's involved, which takes time. So we don't ram standards down people's throats, but we commonly come to these conclusions. And they should be under constant review because the situation is in a current state of flux. And we want to create an environment where we have people with passion that have discovered their essence and understand that their added value on this planet is all tied to their added value being unique as individuals. And that we relish in that uniqueness of each individual. And by following this path, it allows us to further remove the shackles that are tied to our current framework. And allows us to relish in an environment where mutual aid is the maxim. And that we appreciate the uniqueness of each individual. We look at those things that we can do as having much more value if they don't just belong to us, but they belong to all of us. And it means that we are closer to creating that environment of the place where we want to live. And within that valley of darkness, we think very often that this is not possible. Within the valley of darkness, there is no light. Within the valley of darkness is just dark. So how do we as individuals figure out a way to bring light into that collective valley of darkness? Money changes everything. I said money. Money changes everything. You think you know what you're doing We don't hold the strings. It's all in the past now. Money changes everything. And that, dear folks, is what I have put as my personal mission to bring light to that valley of darkness. Knowing full well that this is something I could do. Also knowing full well that it's not easy. Also knowing that I may fail. But I know one thing. I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. And I choose this path freely. The diatribe is coming to an end. We are reaching the last seconds of Tipping Point for this week. Thank you very much for joining. And I wish you all the opportunity to find that light within your own valley of darkness. And I think that's the best I can wish for all of us. And with that, I wish you all a very pleasant week. Thank you.